Underneath the calm surface of my marriage to Isabella, I thought we had it all figured out. Sure, life had its ups and downs, but I believed we were solid, a team that could weather anything. Little did I know, the night everything unraveled was creeping close, and the truth would hit me like a hurricane. That night started like any other Friday. Isabella had been excited about her girls' night for days, chatting endlessly about their plans. "It's going to be wild," she said with a grin, twirling in her little black dress before heading out the door. I'd laughed it off like I always did. I loved seeing her happy and carefree, and I didn't see a reason to question it. I stayed back, content with my quiet evening routine, a beer in hand, sports highlights on TV, and the comfort of our home wrapping around me. But something fell off that night, though I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. By midnight, my usual calm was gone, replaced with a gnawing unease. Isabella hadn't sent her usual texts, no playful updates, no selfies with her friends. The hours dragged on, and by 2 a.m., when the front door creaked open, my world shifted. Isabella stumbled inside, heels dangling from her fingers, and her dress askew. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged. She giggled softly when she saw me, the sound tinged with an edge of nervousness. But it wasn't her appearance that made my stomach drop. It was the tiny detail I noticed as she collapsed onto the couch. She wasn't wearing any underwear. "Isabella?" My voice was tight as I approached her. "Where have you been?" She waved a hand dismissively, brushing off my concern. "Out with the girls, Nate. Don't start." "Where's your underwear?" I asked bluntly, unable to mask the growing dread in my chest. Her laughter stopped, replaced by a hazy, confused look. "What? I must have, I don't know, lost them somewhere." "Lost them?" Her words hit me like a slap, the weight of their meaning suffocating. Her carefree dismissal only deepened a knot in my stomach. I didn't press further. What could I even say? Instead, I watched in silence as she stumbled off to bed, leaving a trail of alcohol and guilt in her wake. That night, sleep eluded me. Every minute brought a new wave of questions, each more damning than the last. I replayed her disheveled state, her flipping answers, and the glaring hole in her story. The pieces didn't fit, and I knew deep down that the truth was far worse than I could comprehend. When morning came, Isabella acted as though nothing had happened. She moved around the kitchen, humming to herself while pouring coffee. But her nonchalance only stoked the fire of my suspicions. Over breakfast, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Isabella, what really happened last night?" She sighed dramatically, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "I told you, Nate. We went out dancing. I had too much to drink, and now I have a headache. Can we not do this?" "Then why weren't you wearing your underwear when you came home?" My tone was sharper now, and she froze, her eyes narrowing defensively. "Seriously? You're still on about that?" She set down her coffee mug with a little too much force. "It's not a big deal. It's just underwear, Nate. God, you're making it into something it's not." Her words cut deep. It wasn't just underwear. It was trust. It was the sanctity of our relationship, and her cavalier attitude was a glaring red flag I couldn't ignore. I didn't argue further. Instead, I let her think I dropped the issue. Inside, though, something had shifted. I couldn't let this go, not without knowing the truth. That day, I couldn't focus on anything else. Isabella's dismissive attitude replayed in my mind, her flippant words an unrelenting echo. It wasn't about her losing underwear. It was about losing trust, the foundation of everything we'd built. I played it cool as we went through the motions of the day. She scrolled on her phone, sipping her coffee, and occasionally threw in a remark about her plans for the weekend. But every smile, every casual gesture felt like a performance. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the truth. That evening, Isabella went to bed early, claiming exhaustion. I sat on the couch in the dim light of the TV, staring at nothing. My gut told me there was more to her story, something she wasn't telling me. I needed proof. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I'd expected. Isabella had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. It was a rare moment of carelessness. She never left it unattended. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I hesitated, torn between fear and resolve. but the memory of her smeared makeup and dismissive laughter pushed me forward. Her passcode was still the same, my birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me as I unlocked it and started scrolling. At first, I found nothing suspicious. The usual group chats with her friends were filled with mundane chatter about outfits and weekend plans. But then, buried beneath the clutter, I saw a conversation with someone named James that I didn't recognize. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you," James had written. "You're trouble, old James. You left something behind. Might have to come and drop it off. Better keep it safe for me." Haha. The room seemed to spin around me. My chest tightened, and my hands shook as I stared at the screen. There was no ambiguity, no room for misunderstanding. Isabella hadn't just lied. She betrayed me. I put the phone down exactly as I'd found it, careful not to leave a trace. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, hurt, disbelief. But above all, a steely resolve began to take shape. This wasn't just a mistake I could overlook. It was a choice, a deliberate act of betrayal. For the rest of the night, I planned my next steps. Confrontation wasn't enough. If I came at her now, she'd lie, twist the truth, or try to manipulate me into forgiving her. No, I needed to think bigger. If she thought she could break me, she was sorely mistaken. The next morning, Isabella acted as if nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, threw on her jacket, and announced she'd be out running errands. "Don't wait up for lunch," she called, her voice light and carefree. As soon as the door closed behind her, I got to work. I started with her laptop, finding a browser history full of deleted pages and private tabs. My suspicions grew as I pieced together her movements over the past few weeks. Bank statements revealed charges for late-night Ubers and a suspicious hotel stay. Everything pointed to one undeniable truth: Isabella had been unfaithful. But I wasn't just going to leave. That would be too easy. She needed to feel the weight of what she'd done. I began by securing my finances. Our joint savings account, something we'd built together over the years, became my first target. I transferred a significant portion to a new account in my name only, leaving enough behind to keep up appearances. Over the next week, I quietly packed my belongings, a little at a time, stashing them in the trunk of my car. Clothes, sentimental items, important documents, all the things I couldn't bear to leave behind. Isabella didn't notice a thing. She was too busy with her late nights and secret rendezvous, oblivious to the storm brewing right under her nose. Then I set my plan in motion. The more I prepared, the calmer I became. My emotions had settled into something sharp and cold, a clarity that came from knowing exactly what I needed to do. Isabella's betrayal had gutted me, but I refused to let it define me. I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to make sure she felt the consequences of every choice she made. Over the next week, I played my role as the doting husband with perfection. I still cooked dinner, still laughed at her jokes, still kissed her goodnight. Inside, though, I was carefully dismantling the life we built together, piece by piece. One afternoon, I decided to confirm my suspicions about her friend, James. I'd already seen the damning text messages, but I needed something concrete, proof that couldn't be denied. After work, I drove to the hotel listed on the bank statement. I found my heart pounding as I walked into the lobby, approaching the front desk with a practiced air of confidence. "Hi, I'm trying to track down a receipt for a stay here last week. It's for my expense report," I said with a polite smile. The receptionist hesitated. "Do you have the name the reservation was under?" I nodded, giving her Isabella's full name. A few keystrokes later, she handed me a printed receipt. There it was, in black and white, Isabella's name, the date of her girls' night, and the room number. My chest tightened as I scanned the details, noting the check-in time late that evening and the checkout early the next morning. I thanked the receptionist and left, gripping the receipt tightly in my hand. My suspicions had been correct, but seeing it confirmed sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She got behind my back and physically acted on it. It was time to act. That night, I started the final phase of my plan. While Isabella scrolled through her phone on the couch, I excused myself to the study, locking the door behind me. I pulled out the receipt, the screenshots of her messages, and the financial records I'd gathered. I compiled everything into a folder, a dossier of her lies. I wasn't sure yet how I'd use it, but I wanted to be ready. The next step was harder. I began drafting a resignation letter for my job, citing personal reasons. My boss had always been understanding, and I knew he'd approve it without issue. I also signed a lease for a small apartment in a different city, just a few hours away but far enough to ensure a clean break. Finally, I began making arrangements for the perfect exit. I didn't want to disappear quietly. I wanted her to know exactly why I was leaving and to feel the weight of my absence. The day everything came to a head, Isabella seemed unusually cheerful. She chatted about a promotion she was hoping for at work and plans for the weekend, completely unaware that her world was about to come crashing down. I stayed calm, playing along with her casual small talk, even though my mind was racing with what I was about to do. That evening, as we sat across the dinner table, I decided to set things in motion. "Isabella," I said, keeping my tone light but deliberate, "do you think we're happy?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What kind of question is that, Nate? Of course we're happy. Why would you even ask?" I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. "Just wondering. Sometimes I feel like maybe we're not as close as we used to be." Her expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Everyone goes through rough patches. We're fine, Nate. Don't overthink it." Her dismissiveness didn't surprise me, but it fueled my determination. I nodded, dropping the subject, but I knew the time was drawing near. Later that night, after Isabella had gone to bed, I placed a folder of evidence on the kitchen counter. On top of it, I placed a letter, short, direct, and damning. "Isabella, I know everything. I know about James, the hotel, and the lies. This isn't a marriage anymore. It's a farce. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't bother trying to find me. You'll never be able to." I placed her favorite coffee mug on top of the folder, a final touch of poetic irony, and walked out of the house for the last time. When Isabella woke up the next morning, I was already miles away, crossing the state line. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts, each one more desperate than the last. "Nate, where are you? Please, let's talk. Nate, I don't know what's happening. Just come home, okay? Nate, what do you mean you're leaving? Is this some kind of joke?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She had her answers waiting for her on the kitchen counter. The first few hours after leaving felt surreal. The weight of my decision hadn't fully sunk in, but each mile I put between myself and Isabella brought a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I felt free from the lies, the doubt, and the suffocating weight of her betrayal. But I knew the real storm was just beginning. When Isabella woke up that morning, she probably didn't notice I was gone at first. I imagined her rolling over in bed, assuming I'd gone for an early run or was busy in the kitchen. Maybe she even smiled to herself, content in her ignorance. But then, reality would have begun to set in. The first sign would have been the silence. No sound of me making coffee or shuffling around the house. Then, she noticed the empty closet, the absence of my shoes by the door, and finally, she found the folder on the kitchen counter. Her reaction was predictable. My phone buzzed endlessly as I drove, her texts and calls coming in rapid succession. "Isabella, what's going on? Where are you? Isabella, this isn't funny. Nate, come home right now. Isabella, I found your letter. We need to talk about this, please. I'm begging you." By the time I reached my new apartment, the desperation in her messages had turned to anger. "Isabella, how dare you leave like this? You don't get to just walk out. Isabella, this is your fault too, Nate. You weren't perfect either. Isabella, you think you're so righteous? Running away doesn't make you better than me." I didn't respond to a single one. Let her stew in the silence. Let her feel the emptiness she created. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Moving into my new apartment, starting a new routine. It was all a distraction from the chaos I'd left behind. I knew from mutual friends that Isabella's life was unraveling quickly. Word had spread among her social circle. The fold of evidence I'd left behind wasn't just for her eyes. I'd made sure copies were discreetly shared with key people in our lives. Mutual friends, her closest confidants, even her mother. None of them were spared from the truth. Isabella had always been the charming one, the one who lit up a room, but now her reputation was in tatters. Friends who once admired her turned cold. Conversations that once revolved around her charm now buzzed with gossip about her betrayal. Even James, the man she'd risked it all for, quickly showed his true colors. Mutual friends told me he ghosted her almost immediately after I left. When she reached out to him, he ignored her calls and texts, making it clear he never intended to stick around. She'd gambled everything and lost. Meanwhile, my new life was beginning to take shape. My apartment was small but cozy, a blank slate for me to rebuild on. I started a new job at a local marketing firm, throwing myself into the work. The structure was comforting, and my coworkers were friendly, unaware of the turmoil I had just escaped. Still, I couldn't completely shut Isabella out of my mind. Every now and then, I'd hear snippets about her from mutual friends. She was struggling, emotionally, financially, socially. The confident, carefree woman I once knew had become a shadow of herself. Point 1. Mutual friend Claire even reached out to me. "I confronted her after you left," she said during a phone call. She admitted everything. "She's a wreck, Nate. She's lost most of her friends. Her mom barely talks to her, and she can't even look people in the eye anymore." I stayed quiet, unsure of how to feel. On one hand, I'd wanted her to face the consequences of her actions, but on the other, there was no satisfaction in seeing someone I once loved fall apart. Months passed, and life slowly settled into a new normal. I started dating casually, dipping my toes back into the world of romance. Each date reminded me that not all relationships ended in betrayal, that trust and love were still possible. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with Isabella and me. Point 1. Crisp autumn afternoon. As I walked into a small cafe near my apartment, I froze. Sitting by the window, nursing a cup of coffee, was Isabella. She looked different, thinner, her hair shorter, her face lined with exhaustion. She stared out the window, lost in thought, her once bright eyes dulled. She hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I considered walking out, but something in me urged me forward. I approached her table, and when I spoke, her head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock. "Isabella," I said, my voice steady. Her face crumpled, and she whispered, "Nathan." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her without asking. The silence between us was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Why did you leave like that?" I held her gaze, my expression unyielding. "You know why." Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded, her composure breaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it's too late, but I need you to know how sorry I am." I leaned back, studying her. There was a fragility to her now, a vulnerability I'd never seen before. "Sorry doesn't fix what you did, Isabella. It doesn't bring back the trust you destroyed." She flinched but didn't argue. "You're right," she said softly. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I've changed, Nathan. Losing you, it made me realize how much I took for granted." Her words hung in the air, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a hollow indifference. "I appreciate the apology," I said, finally standing up, "but it doesn't change anything. I've moved on. Isabella, you should too." Her tears spilled over as she nodded, her hands gripping her coffee mug. "I'll never forgive myself," she whispered. "That's your burden to bear," I replied, my voice cold but firm. "Not mine." And with that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind for the second and final time. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air. I felt the weight of our encounter begin to lift. Walking away from Isabella this time felt different. It wasn't just a physical departure. It was emotional closure. I had no lingering doubts, no regrets. The chapter was closed. But life doesn't always let things go so easily. That week, I received an email from Isabella. At first, I debated deleting it without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Subject: one last apology. "Nathan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I don't blame you, but after seeing you again, I couldn't let things end like that. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I want you to know how deeply I regret everything. Losing you is the hardest thing I've ever gone through, but I deserved it. I know I did. Since you left, I've been trying to rebuild my life, but it hasn't been easy. I've lost friends, my family barely speaks to me, and I can't go anywhere without feeling the weight of my mistakes. But maybe that's what I needed, to hit rock bottom before I could figure out how to climb back up. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness or to try and win you back. I just want you to know that I've changed, and I'll carry the pain of losing you for the rest of my life. You deserve better, Nathan. I'm sorry I couldn't be that for you. Isabella. I stared at the screen for a long moment, emotions swirling. Her words were raw, heartfelt, and maybe even genuine, but they didn't change the past. They didn't erase the betrayal or undo the pain. I closed the email without replying. In the months that followed, life began to truly take shape again. My job grew busier, and I started forming deeper connections with new colleagues. I found a sense of routine, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. I even started seeing someone, a woman named Victoria. She was thoughtful, honest, and refreshingly open about her own struggles. We took things slowly, but for the first time, I felt like I could trust someone again. Victoria didn't try to fix me or erase my past. She simply listened, offering quiet support when I needed it. With her, I found something I hadn't thought I'd ever feel again: peace. Occasionally, I'd hear about Isabella from mutual friends. Her life continued to spiral for a while, but over time, she started finding her footing. She left her old job, moved to a smaller town, and began working with a nonprofit. From what I heard, she was doing better, finally facing her demons and trying to be a better person. Good for her, I thought, but her journey was no longer my concern. Point 1. 1 year after I'd left, I found myself standing at the edge of a quiet lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Victoria was beside me, her hand warm in mine. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the peaceful silence. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way I used to. It's more like a lesson, something that shaped me but doesn't define me anymore." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "You deserve to be happy, Nathan." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. The past was behind me, the scars fading with each passing day. Life had tested me, broken me, and forced me to rebuild from the ground up. But in the end, I'd come out stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future. Because some chapters aren't meant to be rewritten, they're meant to end so new ones can begin.